In today's video, I'm going to be having a look at a review of the Australian dollar from last week. I'm also going to give you some focal points of action I saw last week that's likely to impact this week. And in addition to all of that, we're going to have a quick look at coronavirus around the world. Hello and welcome to another ACY Securities Market Update and Review. My name is Alistair Schultz and I'm going to be your host through today's trading journey. The first thing I'm looking at today is a chart that I've put up for you. It shows all of the high impact events that have really occurred last week and a few other ones that might not be considered high impact but did push price around a little bit. Now, if you were to pause your screen now and have a look at the chart, you would see a number of factors that start to repeat themselves. We saw a lot of action from the world central banks, particularly Japan, the Bank of Canada, and of course, some reports coming out of the Fed as well. Now, there has been a number of different things that have gone on. They have focused mostly on the monetary policy side of things, but we've also had members speaking about the various situations in their current economies. The biggest ones that I really saw from last week were really coming out of the Fed, so I am going to cover a little bit more on that. But otherwise, the big impact news was really resolving around those central bank items and of course, coronavirus impact items. Outside of that, we have seen a little bit related to the idea of a vaccine, and the rest of it is really just hearsay and they say on the political fronts. Having a look at what some of those focal points were from last week, we had the US coronavirus cases spike, particularly in Florida and Texas. Both of these places have had some very big explosions and it's starting to look like they're going to have to re-enter a lockdown again, but we're going to have to wait and see what happens on that front. But at this stage, it's probably very, very likely. Last week, we also saw a lot of data coming out from the ECB. The European Central Bank has been talking about what's going to happen with the PEPP money, which is their recovery stimulus package. Now, they do have some large sums that go in towards that, and they felt and they saw in the data that they probably had a little bit better of a recovery than they were anticipating. So now the question is, are they going to need to use all of that stimulus, or are they able to go on with other things? Now, unfortunately, the boards have not been able to put their heads together and really get to a point in discussion where they can give an answer to the rest of us who really want to know. Unfortunately as well, for that factor, it really looks like the entire world is really addicted to the idea of stimulus. For every time we do get a stimulus package go in, we see monetary value go up, particularly in stock markets. Now, at this point, it's probably not wise. If they were to cut it off, we would probably see a fairly stark drop in the European shares. Now, looking forward from that, that's one of the points I'm going to be looking at for the rest of this week to see where they do spend that money. And at this point, they are headbutting each other to try and get to an agreement, but none thus far. Now, the other one was from Fed Williams. Now, Fed Williams is the president, or John Williams is the president of the New York Federal Reserve. Unfortunately, he's had a number of statements in the past week, and it's also unfortunate about what he says or what he's doing, but it is about how his opinions are about the economy. And he does reflect on a lot of other points that are going on in the US economy, particularly looking at the idea of disinflation and potentially deflation, but he's also got his concerns about the grander sort of perspective on things and how far this really goes on and if they can actually support the economy over the long term. Now, he is basically saying that the US is in a pretty bad situation and it's not going to be just stimulus that gets them out of there. So they are really going to have to consider their options moving ahead and to keep an eye on how things progress. But if the coronavirus infection cases continue to increase and we do enter more lockdowns, he has high concern for the economy of the future. Now, from there, last week, we were also having a look at Chinese GDP figures, which did come out to be quite positive. It was a mixed result, however. There was obviously more on the industry side of things, and it was lagging on the consumer side of things. So they are starkly different. We've got the consumer element where people aren't spending money, but we do have the manufacturing side of things and the industrial output that is increasing. So whilst we have good data, there's also some negative data in there to take into account as well. Moving forward for today, it is a little bit of a coronavirus update as a Monday, as you all know. So there is 14 million new cases globally. In fact, we're nearly 14.5 million. I'm anticipating that that number is obviously going to continue to rise. And unfortunately, before the end of the year, I do see that we're going to be well and truly over 15 million, if not closer to the 20 million mark. Now, in terms of deaths, we've had 605,000. And there are a number of focal points just for coronavirus to have a look at as well. The highlights of this really are the US has 3.7 million cases now and 140,000 deaths. So they are really the outliers here. They are at the top of the table, followed very closely by Brazil. We have LA and Florida likely to re-enter those lockdowns, as I said before, but they also have one of the worst positions in the US at the moment in terms of coronavirus, hence the lockdown, but also probably a struggling economy soon to follow. Now, there has been a lapse in what all their government restrictions have been around coronavirus and social distancing measures, which does explain the very rapid rise in case numbers. Now, Australia has also got several clusters that are occurring. Victoria has been locked down to at least a third phase of restrictions, and New South Wales is now on a high alert status. In fact, today they actually issued a travel warning from the idea of public transport and what you can do to avoid the potential of getting COVID. Now, even though that is the case, it is mimicking what happened in Victoria. It is mimicking what happened in other places around the world, where it started with a very small cluster of infections, and then they lost control of some of the ones or unable to trace where they came from. And then all of a sudden there was new clusters popping up left, right and centre. Sydney and Australia, in New South Wales and Australia is very much on a similar path right now. So we are monitoring that quite closely, and depending on what the situation is, it will depend on where some of these videos that you watch of me may come from in the future. Now, moving forward, the other interesting factor I thought you guys might enjoy is about Brazil's president. Brazil is having a very hard time at the moment, and he has discussed the idea of, the lockdowns that are going on. Yes, they've got more than 2 million cases, and they're over 80,000 deaths at this point, so they are definitely number 2 on the COVID watch list at the moment. And he has basically said that he's concerned about the economic implications. On one side, yes, the lockdown is all about health, health, and health, as he says. But the issue that comes with this is people can't work and people can't do jobs, then their health is going to suffer as well, because they're probably potentially going to be having to starve themselves. So there are two sides to this thing. It's been the questionable content all the way through from the very beginning about which is the right way to actually go about these things. Should they be going with the health implications and locking down economies and making people's livelihoods suffer? Or should they be ignoring the factor and just letting it run rampant so that people can actually earn a dollar? Well, at this point in time, it's very hard to say. And if we were to look back at the past experiences of such countries like Sweden and then compare them to Denmark or any of the other sort of Nordish ways, then there's a stark difference between one country that locked down and another country that didn't. And certainly the health minister, the one that didn't, thought that they should have locked down not long after. So all too little too late, unfortunately, but we do hope they get a better time to come. Now, moving on to the day, there is other things here in this week that we've heard. The Australian budget. Current forecasts are for it to be over budget by $191 billion. So that's a very big number. It's 10% of Australia's GDP. And it generally means that our budget is basically overshot and we have spent way too much money for the Australian government to be able to afford. But hopefully we will hear some more news on that later in the week from Treasurer Josh Frydenberg. So keep an eye on your charts, keep an eye on what's happening on that front, and we should all be good for some trades coming out of that. Now, moving on, these are the things that I'm going to be watching this week. I'm looking for what the Reserve Bank of Australia's governor says. I'm going to be looking at Canadian retail sales, Australia and US coronavirus cases naturally, and seeing where it goes with lockdowns. I'm also going to be having a look at the oil side of the discussion, purely because we can expect that with the decrease in demand across the United States and potentially here in Australia as well, that there is likely going to be some shifting in the value of oil. We've been looking at this for a little while, and oil has been stuck in a $40 per barrel price range for quite some time. So really looking at whether demand increases and the expectation that there is going to be an OPEC meeting later this month, then they will have to decide very soon. So that is definitely something I'm going to keep my eyes on over the next coming weeks, and certainly this week. If I do see any information about it, I'll be sure to inform you. Now from there, I'm also going to be looking at that Ecb Monetary Policy, particularly on the PEPP settings and what they're going to do with the rest of their money. And of course, EU manufacturing PMIs. And last but not least, don't forget, Thursday and Friday is a Japanese bank holiday. So if you are trading the yen, then please be careful with the trading and keep an eye on what is happening on the other markets, because you might see more impact than you used to. Now, if there's anything from today's video you'd like to get in touch with me about, please feel free to shoot me an email at talktoal@acy.com. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe this video so you can get more great content from me and ACY Securities in the future. Have a great trading day ahead.